Matthew 26. Now it came to pass, when Jesus had finished all these sayings, that he said to his disciples, You know that after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified.
The disciples did not yet understand that Jesus would be the ultimate Passover lamb.
Then the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders of the people assembled at the palace of the high priest, who was also called Caiaphas, and plotted to take Jesus by trickery and kill him. But they said, Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people.
Did you know the Passover delayed the religious leaders' plot to kill Jesus? God is sovereign. His plan stands. Verses 6 through 7.
And when Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him having an alabaster flask of very costly fragrant oil, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table.
Jesus brings us healing. We should celebrate daily with gratitude in our hearts.
But when his disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, Why this waste? For this fragrant oil might have been sold for much and given to the poor. But when Jesus was aware of it, he said to them, Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a good work for me. For you have the poor with you always, but me you do not have always. For when pouring this fragrant oil on my body, she did it for my burial.
Nothing is so valuable, but what it pales in comparison to the sacrifice of Christ and, of course, our gratitude for it.
Assuredly, I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to her.
It's interesting. This lady, referenced by John 12:3, Mary, is an example to millions to this day for the praise due Jesus.
Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and said, What are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you? And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver. So from that time he sought opportunity to betray him.
Yes, one sacrificed greatly for Jesus' messiahship. Judas seeks to betray him as if selling a dead slave in value.
Now on the first day of the feast of the unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying to him, Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover? And he said, Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, The teacher says, My time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples. So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover.
Passover preparation. For the meal, yes, but mostly of the mind. The past has led to the present.
When evening had come, he sat down with the 12. Now as they were eating, he said, Assuredly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. And they were exceedingly sorrowful, and each of them began to say to him, Lord, is it I?
A somber supper, honoring God's deliverance. It's revealed that one will betray this Passover lamb.
He answered and said, He who dipped his hand with me in the dish will betray me. The Son of Man indeed goes just as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born.
The convergence of divine foreknowledge and human choice is spotlighted. God's plan will prevail.
Then Judas, who was betraying him, answered and said, Rabbi, is it I? He said to him, You have said it.
Judas's use of teacher versus Lord as others is very interesting. Jesus' words to Judas were stunning to him too.
And as they were eating, Jesus took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to the disciples, and said, Take, eat, this is my body.
Words that we traditionally hear had never been heard or spoken before. The mystery will soon be understood.
Then he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins."
Likely referring to the third cup of blessing, if you consider Exodus 6:6, is given new significance for the new covenant.
"But I say to you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom."
Many believe he spoke these words after the fourth cup of promise. Promise? His parousia, commonly referred to as his return or presence again.
And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives.
The Passover tradition concluded with singing Psalm 114 through Psalm 118. The focus of those psalms, the Messiah, is coming.
Then Jesus said to them, "All of you will be made to stumble because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter answered and said to him, "Even if all are made to stumble because of you, I will never be made to stumble." Jesus said to him, "Assuredly, I say to you that this night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, "Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you." And so said all the disciples.
If you study Zechariah 13, verse 7, yes, his disciples would scatter. John, however, returned and stood with him. We see that fulfilled, John 19:27.
Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and said to the disciples, "Sit here while I go and pray over there." And he took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me."
Intense anguish of body, the anticipation of the crucifixion, of the soul, looming separation from God.
He went a little farther and fell on his face and prayed, saying, "O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and said to Peter, "What? Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak."
We often view ourselves stronger than we are. Seeing our weaknesses by opposition is very humbling.
Again, a second time, he went away and prayed, saying, "O my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done." And he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. So he left them, went away again, and prayed the 3rd time, saying the same words.
God's silence is a testimony to the seriousness of sin's debt. This is the only way for atonement.
Then he came to his disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." And while he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, with a great multitude with swords and clubs, came from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now his betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "Whomever I kiss, he is the one, seize him." Immediately he went up to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. But Jesus said to them, "Friend, why have you come?" Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and took him.
In my words, wake up. The most vital event is underway. The irony? Sin will kill the lamb that will pay for all sin.
And suddenly, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword, struck the servant of the high priest, and cut off his ear. But Jesus said to him, "Put your sword in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Or do you think that I cannot now pray to my Father, and that he will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels? How then could the Scriptures be fulfilled, that it must happen thus?"
Studying 2 Kings 19 is interesting. One angel kills 185,000. 72,000 angels are eager to defend the Lord. That's not the plan.
In that hour, Jesus said to the multitudes, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to take me? I sat daily with you, teaching in the temple, and you did not seize me. But all this was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. And those who had laid hold of Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance to the high priest's courtyard, and he went in and sat with the servants to see the end.
Peter fled, appeared with the mob to observe events. Poor company exposes our weaknesses.
Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last 2 false witnesses came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days." And the high priest arose and said to him, "Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you?" But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, "I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us you are Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "It is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven." And the high priest tore his clothes, saying, "He has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look, now you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think?" They answered and said, "He is deserving of death." Then they spat in his face and beat him, and others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, "Prophesy to us, Christ, who is the one who has struck you?"
Isaiah 53 referenced this treatment, attempting to expose him as a fraud. His enemy's cruelty actually helped validate him.
Now Peter sat outside in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him, saying, "You also are with Jesus of Galilee." But he denied it before them all, saying, "I do not know what you are saying." When he had gone out to the gateway, another girl saw him and said to those who were there, "This fellow also was with Jesus of Nazareth." But again he denied with an oath, "I do not know the man." And a little later those who stood by came up and said to Peter, "Surely you are also one of them, for your speech betrays you."
Jesus acknowledged his identity. Galilean disciples had an accent that linked them to Jesus. What about us? Does our speech let others know who and whose we are?
Then he began to curse and swear, saying, "I do not know the man." Immediately a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the word of Jesus, who had said to him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." So he went out and wept bitterly.
The deeper our love for Christ, the stronger our grief when we sin. His faithfulness to forgive is praised.
When morning came, all the chief priests and elders of the people plotted against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor.
The authorities embraced a heart of darkness. The embrace of sin prompts the shunning of light.
Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned, was remorseful and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." And they said, "What is that to us? You see to it." Then he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed, and went and hanged himself.
Perhaps no remorse can compare to what Judas felt. But remember, it's all sin that aided in his death.
But the chief priests took the silver pieces and said, "It is not lawful to put them into the treasury, because they are the price of blood." And they consulted together and brought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Therefore that field has been called the field of blood to this day.
Content to kill Jesus the Messiah, scrupulous to refuse the blood money. Hypocrisy is an understatement.
Then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the value of him who was priced, whom they of the children of Israel priced, and gave them for the potter's field as the Lord directed me.
Everything is unfolding as God foreknew, recorded in Jeremiah 19 and Zechariah 11.
Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus said to him, It is as you say. And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Then Pilate said to him, Do you not hear how many things they testify against you? But he answered him not one word, so that the governor marveled greatly.
Pilate was not inclined to grant this request. Lies then filled the air. Pilate marveled at Christ's composure.
Now at the feast the governor was accustomed to releasing to the multitude one prisoner whom they wished. And at that time they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ? For he knew that they had handed him over because of envy.
Barabbas, an insurrectionist who had no doubt taken lives, is chosen over the one who gives life.
While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him, saying, Have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him.
Pilate was spiteful towards the Jews, hesitant to sentence him, admonished to not be involved.
But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor answered and said to them, Which of the two do you want me to release to you? They said, Barabbas. Pilate said to them, What then shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ? They all said to him, Let him be crucified. Then the governor said, Why? What evil has he done? But they cried out all the more, saying, Let him be crucified. When Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person, you see to it. And all the people answered and said, His blood be on us and our children. Then he released Barabbas to them. When he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified.
Jesus took the place of Barabbas. He took our place on that cross.
Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole garrison around him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. When they had twisted a crown of thorns, they put it on his head, and a reed in his right hand. And they bowed the knee before him and mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! Then they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. When they had mocked him, they took the robe off him, put his own clothes on him, and led him away to be crucified.
Thankfully, he is still resolved to fulfill the Father's will and not summon the legions of angels.
Now as they came out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. Him they compelled to bear his cross.
Weakness is understandable, and it's seen only in his flesh at this point. His spirit endures the mission ahead.
And when they had come to a place called Golgotha, that is to say, a place of a skull, they gave him sour wine mingled with gall to drink, but when he had tasted it, he would not drink.
At the place of skulls, Latin for Calvaria, Jesus was offered a narcotic. For every reason, he refused it.
Then they crucified him, and divided his garments, casting lots, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet. They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Sitting down, they kept watch over him there.
His stripped, crucified body fulfills the prophesied shame he would unjustly endure. Psalm 22:18.
And they put up over his head the accusation written against him, This is Jesus, the King of the Jews.
Pilate crafted a most accurate charge for this man. The Jews hated their prophesied king.
Then 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and another on the left. And those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who destroyed the temple and built it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." Likewise, the chief priests also, mocking with the scribes and elders.
With Psalm 22, 109, and Lamentations 2, God knew the souls in need of the light would prefer the darkness. He still came.
The scribes and elders said, "He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he is the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now if he will have him, for he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" Even the robbers who were crucified with him reviled him with the same thing.
Very reminiscent of Satan's temptations in chapter 4, 2 through 10. His divinity substantiates our hope of eternal salvation.
Now from the 6th hour until the 9th hour, there was darkness over all the land.
The darkest hours of history signified divine judgment and mourning as the Messiah became our sacrifice.
And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some of those who stood there, when they heard that, said, "This man is calling for Elijah."
The people hear the Aramaic word, Eloi, and think he calls for Elijah, who doesn't answer. But this is the one moment in all eternity the Son of God calls to the Father, who doesn't answer, for he has been forsaken or abandoned.
Immediately, one of them ran and took a sponge, filled it with sour wine, and put it on a reed, and offered it to him to drink. The rest said, "Let him alone. Let us see if Elijah will come to save him."
Too fixated on mocking to recall 2 Kings 1, 10 through 12, such a return would have led to their destruction. He wanted to save them.
And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit.
Jesus consistently yielded to the Father's will. His substitutionary sin-bearing accomplished the otherwise impossible: justification, atonement, reconciliation. Praise God that I can start anew.
Then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth quaked, and the rocks were split, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many.
Wow. The blessing of forgiveness under this new covenant wasn't just to those from that point forward. His sacrifice paid sin's debt for all followers of God from that point backward. He was offered once and for all for the sins of the world.
So when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that had happened, they feared greatly, saying, "Truly, this was the Son of God."
Even pagan soldiers could see the supernatural and or the messiahship of this man, which was a further shame to the Jews.
And many women who followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, were there looking on from afar, among whom were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joses, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. Now when evening had come, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate commanded the body to be given to him. When Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his new tomb when he had hewn out of the rock. And he rolled a large stone against the door of the tomb and departed. And Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary sitting opposite the tomb.
executed like the most horrid sinner, and yet still given a king's burial. Old Testament Scripture is still being fulfilled. One particular claim was on everyone's mind.
On the next day, which followed the day of preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees gathered together to Pilate, saying, "Sir, we remember, while he was still alive, how that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Therefore command that the tomb be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say to the people, 'He has risen from the dead.' So the last deception will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard, go your way. Make it as secure as you know how." So they went and made the tomb secure, sealing the stone and setting the guard.
In anticipation of the next 10 verses, Jesus' enemies did not believe his claim of resurrection. However, they feared the body would be stolen and the claim believed. Roman temple court guards played their divine role in confirming our faith in this event. As we shift to chapter 28.
Now after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it.
Demonstrating triumph and futility of opposition, an angel sits atop the tomb's stone. He moves aside.
His countenance was like lightning, and his clothing as white as snow. And the guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men.
Biblically, whenever heaven's power or divine nature is witnessed, it tends to make humans faint. An interesting or terrific irony. Living humans become like corpses when the corpse they were commissioned to guard becomes more alive than ever.
But the angel answered and said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he said. Come, see the place where the Lord lay, and go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and indeed he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you."
This is the greatest news. Go share it everywhere.
So they went out quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy and ran to bring his disciples word.
Both fear and joy are natural when just mere humans embrace allegiance to a divine purpose.
And as they went to tell his disciples, behold, Jesus met them, saying, "Rejoice." So they came and held him by the feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brethren to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." Now while they were going, behold, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priest all the things that had happened. When they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers, saying, "Tell them, his disciples came at night and stole him away while we slept. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will appease him and make you secure." So they took the money and did as they were instructed, and this saying is commonly reported among the Jews until this day.
The chief priest's bribe to lie indicated the validity of the original testimony. The tomb is empty. Jesus is risen.
Then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee, to the mountain which Jesus had appointed for them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted.
How long would it take our eyes to convince our minds death is not the end of this life?
And Jesus came and spoke to them, saying, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. Amen."
Those passionate about the greatest message ever told will follow Jesus, leading others to him along the way.